Imagine a son who receives a long letter from his father, written by hand, sealed, meant to be read whole. He does not like every sentence in it, so he tears away the parts that unsettle him, the instruction that he finds hard, the corrections that sting. He keeps only the lines that comfort him, folds them into his pocket, and tells everyone that he is following his father's word. He's not lying about loving the letter. He truly loves the parts he kept. But he has quietly decided that he, not his father, gets to say which parts count. The rest lie torn on the floor of a room he no longer enters. He calls this devotion. His father would call it something else. This is also what happens to Christ's teaching, when a man decides that he alone will determine which parts of it are real. I want to be honest with you before we go any further. I have felt that same pair of scissors in my own hand. The wish to keep the words of Christ that counsel me and quietly set aside the ones that cost me something. So I am not speaking to you from above this problem. I am speaking to you from inside it. And I am not here to shame anyone who walked away from a church that wounded them, because that wound is real and I have watched it happen. You have probably met the idea that I want to examine today, perhaps in a video, perhaps from a friend who left the church and found something that felt more honest. And that idea, it goes like this: religion is the problem and Jesus is the answer. Strip away the pastors, the doctrines, the sacraments, the labels, whether Christian or Buddhist or Muslim or anything else, and what remains is a pure private relationship between you and Him. And also, the kingdom of God is within you. So look within, watch, wait, and you will find a Christ who needs no church at all. That idea deserves respect before it deserves correction, because most people who hold it are not lazy or rebellious. Many of them have been genuinely hurt. They have watched clergy fail, watched institutions protect themselves rather than the vulnerable, watched holy words used as weapons also. If that is your story, I will not tell you that your injury is imaginary or that you are simply proud. But a wound, however real, is not an argument, and the question still stands. Did Christ actually teach this, or have we read a modern preference back into Him because it is comfortable? Begin with the claim that all religions are equally optional, Christianity included, so that the honest man discards every label and keeps only Jesus. The difficulty is that Jesus Himself refuses to be one option on a shelf. In John 14, He says, "I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me." That is not a teacher offering a technique that could sit beside other techniques. That is an exclusive claim about who He is. And the moment you accept it, the idea that He is interchangeable with other paths collapses. And notice what happens to the very words you are quoting when you discard the church. You know the sayings of Jesus because four gospels were written, copied, preserved, argued over, and finally recognized as canonical by bishops in council within the community He founded. There is no unmediated Jesus available to you. The Jesus you are trying to follow directly was handed to you by the church you are trying to leave behind, which is why St. Paul calls that church in 1 Timothy 3 the pillar and the ground of the truth. Then comes the second claim, that following Jesus means obeying His teaching rather than following pastors or churches, as though these were opposites. Christ does not treat them as opposites anywhere. He says to Peter in Matthew, On this rock I will build my church, and the gates of Hades shall not prevail against it. He tells the 70 in Luke, he who hears you hears me, he who rejects you rejects me. And in Matthew 28, he sends them to make disciples of all the nations, baptizing them, teaching them, to observe all things that I have commanded you. That is not a private feeling planted in scattered hearts. That is a structure with man authorized to teach and baptize, extending forward in time. Saint Ignatius, writing to the Simons while being marched to his death in Rome, perhaps 40 years after the resurrection, put it without ornament. Where the bishop appears, there let the people be, just as where Jesus Christ is, there is the Orthodox Church. He was not inventing this. He had received it from men who had walked with the apostles themselves. Now we reach the heart of the matter, the claim that the kingdom of God is within you, which is taken to mean that the kingdom is only within, and that everything outside is scaffolding to be knocked away. I want to say something that may surprise you. Orthodoxy agrees that the kingdom is within. In Luke 17:21, Christ says exactly that, and the entire ascetic tradition of the church is built around it. Saint Isaac the Syrian writes that a man who has come to know himself and enter into his own heart has found the ladder by which he ascends to the kingdom. So the error is not in looking inward, the error is in the small word only. The fathers describe an inner faculty they call the nous, the eye of the soul, which in fallen man is darkened, scattered, and mixed with the passions. The whole labor of Orthodox life is the healing of that faculty so that it can perceive God. But no one in the tradition ever taught that this healing happens by simply turning attention inward and waiting, because what you find when you turn inward is not only Christ. You find your own memory, your own desires, your own imagination, and the fathers insist the suggestion of demons who are perfectly willing to appear as light. Evagrius and the entire philocalic tradition treat this as the basic condition of the inner life, not an unusual danger. This is why the kingdom within is never set against the sacraments in Orthodoxy, but healed through them. The inner kingdom and the visible church are not rivals. One is the field, the other is the plough. Which brings us to the sacraments, the part of Christ's teaching most often torn from the latter. On the night he was betrayed, he did not gather the disciples for a mediation. He took bread, gave thanks, broke it, and said in Luke 22:19, "This is my body, which is given for you. Do this in remembrance of me." And in John 6:50, he says, most assuredly, I say to you, unless you eat the flesh of the sons of the men and drink his blood, you have no life in you. Those are the words of a man commanding a physical, communal act that cannot be performed alone in a room. Let me tell you what happens when a serious man ignores these. Saint John Cassian records the story of a monk named Valens, a man of a real disciple, real fasting, real prayer, no hypocrite at all. Over time, Valens came to trust his own inner experience above the counsel of his elders, and his private visions began to feel more authoritative than the community that had formed him. At last he became convinced that Christ had appeared to him personally and told him he had passed beyond the need for the Eucharist. So he refused communion, believing he had graduated into a purer relationship with the Lord. Saint Cassian does not record this as a bizarre exception. He records it as the natural end of a spiritual life cut loose from obedience. This is what the tradition calls prelest, spiritual delusion. And it almost never arrives looking like sin. It arrives looking like intimacy with God, and it feels wonderful from the inside, which is precisely what makes it lethal. That is why the Church insists on something outside your own judgment to test what you find within: a spiritual father, confession, the sacraments, a community that has walked this road for 2000 years and knows where the cliffs are. Turn back to your own life for a moment and ask a plain question. If there is no church, no sacrament, no confessor, who decides which of Christ's words are essential and which are cultural baggage? It is you, every single time, on the stretch of your own reading and your own sense of what rings true. That is not freedom from religion. That is a religion of one in which you are the only priest, the only bishop, and the only judge of your own delusions. Saint Cyprian of Carthage wrote that he can no longer have God for his father who does not have the church for his mother. And the sentence offends the modern ear, but he has not defending a bureaucracy of building or a budget. He was describing a living body into which a man is grafted at baptism. Christ used the same image in John 55. I am the vine, you are the branches. A branch does not become more spiritual by pruning itself away from the vine in search of a purer connection to the root. It simply withers. Abba Dorotheus of Gaza gives the clearest picture of why this is so. Imagine a wheel, he says, with God at the center, and in every human soul a spoke running from the rim toward that center. The closer any spoke moves to God, the closer it necessarily comes to every other spoke. You cannot draw nearer to Christ while drawing further from his body, because those are not two paths between which you may choose. They are one motion. So here's what I would ask of you, not someday, but this week. If you have been following Christ alone, with your own reading and your own inner sense of what is true, go and stand in a divine liturgy, even if you believe almost nothing that is said there. Do not go to evaluate it. Go to be present in it. Sit at the back, say nothing, let the words wash over you, and give it more and one Sunday, than one Sunday. Before you decide alone what the church is, sit inside the church for a while and find one person you can be honest with about your inner life. Someone older in faith, farther along, who is permitted to tell you when your private reading of Christ has quietly become a reading of yourself. That is what confession is for, and what a spiritual father is for. It is not control, and it is not surveillance. It is the correction that Valens refused, offered in love, which is the only thing that might have saved him. St. Paul told the Thessalonians to stand fast and hold the traditions which you were taught, and that holding was never meant to be done with one pair of hands. I will not pretend any of this is easy, because trusting a community again after one has hurt you is among the hardest movements a soul can make. But Christ never asked you to trust an institution's perfection. He asked you to trust his promise that the gates of Hades will not prevail against what he built, weak members and all, and that promise has held for 2000 years in ordinary parishes, on ordinary mornings, without headlines. If something here has unsettled you, I do not think that is a bad sign. It may only mean that the letter you tore apart still has your name on it, still waiting to be read whole. And there is a door open to you whenever you are ready to walk through it. God bless you and see you next time.